What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Home Slice, and I know this EDC tournament has been really wacky. To be honest, I sort of had all my leftovers that didn't fit the categories of my other tournaments I have planned and lumped them all into this first tournament. So in our first round, we had nylon handled Buck 110 against FRN, Spyderco, Mannix 2, and Spy 27 to try out hollow grind versus flat grind to see if I can feel the differences between steel and see if the modifications that I did to regrind that buck made it cut close to as well as the Spyderco. That thing ended up still whittling hair after 2 weeks because it was so thin, like 3 or 4 thousandths behind the edge. It was still whittling hair 2 weeks after I started carrying it, after cutting up cardboard and everything with just a simple strop back on a diamond strop. So it passed on to the next round. It is going to take on the CJRB Pyrite, which in my last episode I carried against a Kershaw Leak in stainless steel, which is actually my wife's EDC. Loved them both, but I found the Pyrite to be a more new and fresh and exciting take on an EDC knife for me. Coming up to today, we've got another hollow grind versus flat grind. Obviously, these guys are like flat grind versus hollow grind. And coming up to today, we've got another hollow versus flat grind competition. The two knives that we will be dueling off today are both clip point slip joints. That rhymed, that was nice. Really fun micarta clad designs that I have really enjoyed the look of, the feel of, and I'm really excited to get them in my pocket. The first one is a Civivi Appalachian Drifter, which has been discontinued now. But this one is in S35VN, very thin behind the edge. I want to say about 11 thousandths of an inch behind the edge. It's got a flipper tab, which doesn't really work anymore because like the pressure of the detent bar was so light that just sharpening it on the stone, like the tip of this would hit a piece of abrasive and this would actually like pop closed like that. So that kind of scared me, and I deconstructed this whole thing and bent the detent bars in a little bit. So took it from where it was really easy to overcome to where now you got to put a decent amount of pressure on it to get the thing to close, and I'll feel more safe carrying it. Love the thin blade stock, thin hollow grind. Love the fuller, love the finish on this knife. It's my first Civivi that I will ever carry, actually. And Civivi does a great job with detail. Like, they really interlace the details on their knives, and they create smooth and very intricate designs. So I'm very excited. It's got textured micarta. I got this thing on sale on the closeout when they discontinued it, so I got it for about half price at about 50 bucks. It is going to be going up against the Kershaw Federalist. The Kershaw Federalist, guys, look how thin. Ah! I love the Kershaw Federalist just from a design standpoint. It's got so much edge to such a small carry footprint. This just feels like it disappears in your pocket. Some guys take issue with the fact that it doesn't have a pocket clip, which I understand. I don't think it'll bother me because when I'm carrying a slicer or a slip joint, I kind of just like to throw it in my pocket and let it bang around with whatever's in there. It's got a beautifully flat ground clip point blade. It's got the corners squared off up here. And then at the clip point, the spine straightens. I really love a lot of the design decisions they made on this. I like the pivot hardware. I love how thin and how narrow they left the design overall. And I like the sweep of the edge. This thing took an incredibly crisp edge, this CPM 154, which brings me to sharpening. So my turnaround time is quite high. Like, from filming to actually producing a video, it's like months and months because I have 4 children and I got to get most of my work done in little snippets of afternoon on the weekend or night times. Anyway, in real time, recently, there was a video that came out from Neves Knives where he mentioned what kind of edge he likes to put on each different kind of steel. Also in real time, there was a video by Alex at Outdoors55 that talked about his deburring process that he does with edge leading alternating strokes with lightning pressure on diamond usually. Also in the recent past I should say, my friend Max from Stroppy Stuff came out with this video where he detailed the proper way, in his opinion, his professional opinion, to create a good toothy edge and the kind of edge that he likes to put on knives. And so I've sort of brought all those things together. Jared at Neves Knives happened to say that for S35VN and for CPM 154, which these two are in respectively, both of these he likes a toothy edge better. So I had just done an edge test on these with a fine edge where they did fine with the rope. And I then took them to my Veneve FEPA 400 grit stone and put a nice toothy edge on each of these at Jared's recommendation. I used Alex's alternating edge leading strokes with really light pressure for the deburring on the stone. And then I used Max's advice from Stroppy Stuff to do the stropping and deburring on leather with 1 micron and 0.25 micron diamond of his product. The resulting edges have so much grab, they just feel absolutely wonderful. And I've made an unusual decision, okay? Because when you have a best machine, you put your knife through that little piece of line and it gives you a number. And sometimes, just like if you're like trying to lose weight, you know, like you can feel like you're doing well and you can be doing well and you can be getting healthier, but you can step on that scale and the number can tell you something, and maybe you gained some muscle and lost some fat and you're actually way healthier, but you sort of fixate on that number. And I've found that always for like coarse edges, the best machine will not rate them well. They'll always be a high best reading. And so I decided, rather than fixating on a number, I am not going to best test these before I carry them. I'm just going to give you my honest feedback about how the edge feels and whether I was pleased about it. Maybe I'll best test them at the end and see how good they stayed. But I'm going to try for this episode to give the toothy edge a chance. I haven't done this for a while. To not obsess over the number, but just to carry and enjoy and to recognize the physical limitations of its efficiency in cutting and make that the main thing. I'm going to put on screen right now all the specifications about a knife that I actually care about. Okay, you're welcome to skip this part if you caught it in the last video, but I've got enough interest that I'll probably continue explaining it until I make a standalone video. Basically, these are the only measurements that I really care about in a knife at all. I do care about how knives look, but the main things I care about is how long is the edge? Why do I care about that? Well, you can have a blade that's as long as you want, but only the sharpened surface is really functional. So more edge length in my mind creates more versatility, and if you can pack extra edge length into a smaller design, that's really awesome. I care about the thickness of the edge. That's measured in thousandths of an inch there, but I only measure that after I've reprofiled a knife to 17 degrees per side. The reason being is that knives that are sharpened at much more thick or obtuse angles, once resharpened, will actually be thicker behind the edge. And so the slope of the grind is how much rise of the grind happens for every millimeter of blade thickness. The max usable spine thickness is basically how thick the knife is at its thickest point that is above the edge and therefore has to be forced through something when you're cutting it. And the in-pocket surface area is if you close the knife and measure the height and width of it, multiply those together, that's sort of the square footage or the square inchage that it's taking up in your pocket overall. So overall, the first two measurements, longer is better, having more functional edge, within reason is better. The behind the edge thickness, the third measurement, lower is better. The slope of the grind, if the number is higher, that means you have more grind height for every millimeter of thickness, so you get more sliciness if that number is high. The spine thickness I like to be low unless I'm going for a work knife, and so lower is better there. The in-pocket surface area I like to be low because I like to not be carrying a lot of extra square footage around of my knife in my pocket. I'll take a little extra time this time because some people have wondered about the last two numbers. Basically, Gabe's magical golden size ratio is just the in-pocket surface area in inches divided by the amount of functional edge length times 10, and basically gives you kind of a 1 to 10 scale of how much utility you're packing around in your pocket versus how big your knife is to provide that utility. The slice factor is really complicated, but it's also kind of a 1 to 10. So both of these, the higher they are, the better. The slice factor is a complicated thing I'm working on. I'm not quite done with it, but basically it takes the behind the edge thickness, the slope of the grind, and the max usable spine thickness. It converts each of those numbers to where the best possible version of that, like the thinnest behind the edge or the highest slope that I'm aware of or whatever, would equal about 3.5 points. So it roughly rounds out at just over 10 if everything was perfect, and it gives you an idea overall on a 1 to 10 scale of how slicey any given knife would be as a calculation. This will be a really interesting test for me because the blade shape of these is very similar. Clip point, this has got a little bit more concave nature to the end of it. The thickness of the blades and the taper is very similar. The edge shape is very similar, and the edge length is fairly close, but the Kershaw Federalist, they've squeezed just a little bit more edge in there, which I do love. The edge came up really crisp on this CPM 154, even better, I would say, than this S35VN. I've never had an amazing experience with S35VN. It's always sort of like par for the course, like good working edge, not overly keen, not overly aggressive. But that said, I've only tried it on like ZTs and other knives, which I suspect were a little bit soft. So I'm hoping that this S35VN by Civivi has been properly hardened, and maybe I'll have a better experience with it. It formed a wonderful grabby working edge, which I'm really excited to use. Anyway, these are very similar designs overall. Both slip joint, both clip point, both grippy micarta, both very slim, minimal pocket carry characteristics. And so the big difference between them is hollow grind versus a really nicely done high full flat grind. And so this will be probably the truest and most accurate representation of whether I like hollow grind or flat grind better. I'll come at you with some observations in just a second. I guess since we're not going to do a best test, here's a quick little demo. Hopefully you can see okay. Definitely shaving. A little more scrape shavy on this Civivi, but definitely removing hair, clean surface, lots of grab. Kershaw, it's the same story. I would say it got significantly smoother. You can even hear the difference. Or rather, you can't hear the difference because this shaves more quietly. And this has been my experience largely with CPM 154 versus S35VN. I like the fine edge characteristics. I like the way those chromium carbides polish out, to be honest, versus the S35VN. I sometimes struggle to get it as fine and as smooth as I'd really like it. In terms of paper, it's got that like sort of medium volume, if you will. It's not super quiet, although that's a little quieter. But you can still tell it's an aggressive edge, and the I'm not very good at cursive cuts, but oh, well, that wasn't bad. But they're both doing very well with all these different paper tests. I'd say slightly better on the Kershaw. I really, man, the edge this Kershaw Federalist took is absolute butter. But they're both very good edges. I'm going to carry the Civivi first. right, coming back to you after 1 week of use each, and what things do we have to say about the Civivi Appalachian Drifter in S35VN steel and the Kershaw Federalist folder in CPM 154. Well, it's been a tough battle. I really like both of these slip joints. Like, I have not been disappointed with either of them by a long shot. If you are into like fun opening mechanisms, even like sneaky ones in your slip joint, then if you had access to still buy a Appalachian Drifter, this one is for you. Definitely, it has the flipper action. Although I stiffened that detent up, so it's a little harder. It's worth noting on the stock sort of settings, it's quite easy to flick that. It's quite hard now. You may have seen me just grimace as the jimping bit into my finger because I locked that detent in heavier, as I mentioned earlier in the video. A much more fidgety, and I would say probably a more refined knife. There's 3D machining on this micarta. The lanyard hole goes in and out through the back. There's just some really nice touches on the Civivi Appalachian Drifter that make it a really refined sort of folder. The S35VN performed pretty well, and the hollow grind worked well, but I have some things to say on that front, and I'll come back to that. But as far as the Kershaw goes, I really like the amount of confidence you have with the grip. This is a very straight grip, and so it does feel a little risky. I did a campfire and we were whittling some marshmallow and hot dog roasting sticks, and I both had to make sure I didn't bear down too hard on the back here to break the lock pressure, and I had to make sure I didn't slip with my hand being sweaty because there's not really anything there to stop you. So I didn't love that about the Appalachian Drifter, although it does lend for a really nice aesthetic flow to not have anything sticking out really far. That said, the feel of this micarta is perfection. Like, Kershaw just 100% absolutely nailed this. The thickness of it I really like, because I really like a thin, light-duty EDC. There's a little bit of flex there. I don't care about that at all. I love this slight choil for your index finger there. And I love that the handle sweeps forward, so you're not as tempted to rest your thumb up on the blade. It's a little bit less natural, where this one, you're right there, you know? If I'm a little scared just doing that. But the Kershaw Federalist is a, for sure, dedicated two-handed opener. It's very difficult to open it any other way. There's no exposed blade anywhere. You can get your thumb into the nail nick and sort of like pry it out, but it's not enjoyable or safe feeling. So it's definitely going for the full two-handed traditional slip joint open. Let's get down to edge retention. I have to say, with the FEPA 400 grit Veneve stone that I sharpened these on, straight to the strop, the edge that this Kershaw Federalist took was butter. And every time I have used it, all the way up until present, I have been satisfied by this edge. I don't know that it will have no hiccups or portions where it developed a problem, but I do know that the overall performance of this edge was crazy good for CPM 154. And I'm really pleased to say that because I've had some experiences in the past where Kershaw or ZT, I wondered if they were quite on with their heat treatment. But I feel from a sharpening perspective, this thing let go of burr. I don't think there's heaps of like unnecessary retained austenite or whatever. And I think that overall the hardening and heat treatment has been done superbly on this Kershaw. Nice thin grind. I loved the grind. I loved the angle that the tip sits down at, so you can pull through and make these sliding cuts. I was just cutting up an apple. It was beautiful. There's no point on this blade where anything binds up. The edge is nice and thin, and it's really slicey. It's really what you want in, a full-size slip joint like this. You want a good amount of working edge, and you want to be able to do food prep tasks and light-duty EDC all day long with as much smoothness as possible, and Kershaw really nailed that with this knife. When it comes to the Civivi, I liked how thin the edge was, and there were certain tasks that it was just amazing at. But I have to say, about 50% of the things that I did with this edge, and I know there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just heat treatment and just steel. It's also the particular stone that I used and how well that pairs with the structure of this steel. But I have to say, I didn't like the overall performance of this steel as much. It cut much more chunky, much more kind of working edge, not so smooth, lost aggression faster. And as far as the grind goes, I love a good hollow grind, but something about the chalkiness of this oxide treatment that they've put on here to turn it this charcoal gray color, paired with the fact that this fuller has really it's not rounded out, it's like squared sides, and that's right at the end of the grind. It means when you're cutting through things that really press together like an apple, they actually come up over that lip and then they want to come in this fuller space, and then they hit the friction of this texturing on this harsh transition, the square edge, and it did bind up a little bit more in different things. When I was cutting up carrots or capsicum and you're just sliding through on a cutting board and you're only interfacing with this portion, it was a dream to cut with. And I did tons of that. I actually prepped a huge meal for a graduation ceremony for my organization, and I primarily used this to cut up the veggies, and it was awesome overall. I also have to say, in terms of working edge that doesn't develop any problem spots, S35VN has worked better than any of the steels that I have tested so far. That's probably partially because I messed up the edge on my Spyderco in CPM S35VN, but it's also because high vanadium steels really hold that medium aggression, functional working edge really, really well. I'll give you a paper cut test to demonstrate. No problems. There is not a single point with any bind up there at all. That said, you can't push cut. It's a really good slice cut. Still, just really effective and capable as long as you're drawing the blade through the material. But the moment you try to enter into a push cut, you're gonna hit some pretty severe problems. This Kershaw, I love the way this edge is feeling. I haven't tested it on paper yet, but yeah, it's good. I would say it feels like there is a little bit of a rough spot developing right here. It does seem to have a little bit of the sort of slowdown, as Pete would call it, right there. And so there is more difference to the different parts of the edge. But the overall smoothness with which this thing cuts and does any task has been much, much better, actually, than the Civivi Appalachian Drifter. I don't think it's push cutting either. Nah. Yeah, it's not really push cutting either. So you'll kind of have to take it from me on feeling alone that the aggression is still there. But I have to say, about 50% of the things I tried with this Appalachian Drifter, I wasn't a fan of how the edge really performed. And 100% to this point of the things that I have cut with this Kershaw Federalist, I have loved how the edge performed for a whole week. I also have to say, when it comes to stropping things back, like every blade that I've done between Tuesday and Friday, starting on Monday, I've felt like, oh, I'd like to strop that up and just make sure it comes back a little closer to that original sharpness. Maybe I cut up a really abrasive cardboard box, and I cut up a lot of cardboard boxes. But so far, I'll just notice, oh, the edge isn't quite where it was every single time. I know it's a good steel when I get closer to Friday or Saturday before I'm stropping it back. But I have to say, I stropped this thing on Friday because it was really good through Friday. But I haven't even stropped this thing yet because I haven't been disappointed with the way it cut anything yet, which is pretty awesome considering that CPM 154 is kind of lower Catra edge retention steel. Anyway, I'm talking. I have to say, with the overall design aesthetic, I really appreciate how refined and detailed this Civivi is. I think that actually, versus the Kershaw, it really hits it out of the park on smoothness and fine details. It's actually better. But I have to say, for things that I personally like in my tastes, which is no-nonsense functionality, simplicity, that sort of Apple-esque, minimal aesthetic, where it's just everything on the knife is just functional and clean. I really like this Kershaw Federalist, and I feel like it doesn't make sense because both of these, when I bought them, would MSRP for around $100, and this technically has better steel, and it technically has better machining, and it technically is more refined. But guys, I just like this Kershaw Federalist. I really, really enjoy it. The handle is perfection. The grip is right where you want it to be. It's so slim in the pocket. I don't even miss the flick action and the pocket clip. I just chuck it in my pocket, and every time I pull it out, it's such a joy to use. I don't even mind two-handing it. So I have to give the win for my own personal enjoyment. Now, you guys can argue with me in the comments. I have to give the win to this Kershaw Federalist. It just didn't bind up on anything. It didn't stop cutting at any point in a way that was satisfactory to me. So, love this folder. It's gonna go on to the next stage of this tournament. Love this folder as well, but it just didn't quite bring the joy that this old Kershaw Federalist did. I also have to say Kershaw has a special place in my heart because my first good knife that got me into the hobby was a Kershaw Leek. And that sort of got me started noticing edge retention, geometry, and different things. And on the Leek, that's really thin and a really minimal aesthetic. And I feel like this knife is sort of nostalgic for me because it sort of echoes that old Kershaw priority set of like narrow, thin, minimal in your pocket, slicey. And I really like that. I have to say with Kershaw, they were all I carried for a while, way back 10, 15 years ago. And I really liked them at that time. For a while, I was sort of almost losing faith with Kershaw because everything was 8CR 13 MOV, everything was China made, and I just lost interest in a lot of the things that they were making. But also, watching SHOT Show when this particular knife came out, I feel like Kershaw's sort of undergone a bit of a revival, and they're using some different steels, and they're coming back to some of those mainstays of their past design. And I'm really a fan of where their present design and function mentality is going. And so I also am excited because I feel like seeing this knife come up on SHOT Show was a bit of a like, oh, Kershaw's interesting to me again. That has like the geometry of a bug out and the look of a grandpa knife and the grip of everything I want it to be. And indeed, it has proved to be all of that. Now, I never tested these on the best machine in the beginning, so I don't even know where they started out best wise, and I'm not going to make any guesses now, but I'll take a best reading before we finish the test, and then I'll give you my final thoughts. All right. 280 for the Civivi Appalachian Drifter in S35VN. And I have to say, I feel like that's kind of characteristic of steels with your sort of higher vanadium content, that they sort of drop to that close to 300 grams best range, but then they'll hold that 300 to 350 grams best range a lot longer than your low vanadium steels, at least in my limited experience, versus when we tested the CJRB Pyrite with that their proprietary RPM 9 steel, and when we tested the Kershaw with 14C28N, they were both at around the 250 mark is where they dropped back to. The Kershaw Federalist, obviously a worse rating at 294 grams, but to be fair, this hasn't been stropped, so I think I'm gonna go step off the camera to my kangaroo strop. Unloaded kangaroo strop would be what I used for this, and I'll give this as many passes on the kangaroo strop, which was I think about 20, that I did on this Appalachian Drifter, and we'll come back and see if it regains about the same amount to be at 280 or below, and then we'll give our final comments. Okay, so now we're back for a fair comparison with equal amount of stropping. Let's see how we're doing on the paper. Oh yeah. 202 grams. That's awesome. I had a feeling this was doing better. Oh, that's awesome. Anyway, Kershaw Federalist wins the slip joint round. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. If you want to check out the last episode where the Kershaw leak took on the CJRB Pyrite, the link's on screen now. For the rest of you, I'll say peace out from the home slice, and I hope you guys have a good day.